We have a special guest coming on the show. Chat, special guest FD Signifier on the stream. How you doing? Thank you for coming on to the show, FD. I appreciate you taking some time to talk to us today.
No problem, man. No problem.
For anybody who is in the chat who may not know who you are, feel free to introduce yourself.
I am a FD Signifier. I am a video essayist. I've been doing YouTube since I think I started during COVID. Started making waves probably a year later, and have been trying to keep this hamster wheel running ever since. And I make predominantly I make the classic video essay oeuvre, a little media analysis.
So I reached out to you because I am working on a video on Angola. I'm in Louisiana, and Angola's been a kind of a mythos built around it since my childhood, and I have always tried to kind of highlight the particularly egregious aspects of Angola. And as part of this video, you and your work has been a big influence on it. So I wanted to get your perspective. One of the things that I am trying my best to put forward in this video is every time I see someone cover Angola or incarceration at all, is that oftentimes journalists, media people who are going into these incarceration places, is the question of like, how long are you in for? Did you do it? But we never look at the root causes of like, how did someone end up in a situation that they found themselves in a place like Angola?
Can you give me some? My wife's from Louisiana, she's from New Orleans.
Okay.
I have some familiarity with New Orleans' unique history, but when I hear Angola, I think Africa.
Your head went to the right place thinking of the African country Angola because it is named after the country. This was a conglomeration of plantations, about like 4 or 5 plantations, and was purchased by the state for convict leasing in, I believe, I have it all written down, like 1869. And in 1901 was officially made as the Louisiana State Penitentiary. It's the largest maximum security facility in the U.S. And of the many stark examples that the Neo-Confederacy is still very alive and well, is that this was originally a cotton and agricultural plantation and still is today. There are tiers that the trustee program has inside of Angola, where tier 1 trustee worker, you're in the fields. You are literally, and we're talking about a population of, I believe at this moment, 75% black within Angola. And most of these are
literally
lifers.
picking cotton.
Yes, literally picking cotton, okra, peppers.
Wow.
There's connections to multiple international corporations that directly benefit off of this. So this is private prison, even though it's a state, it is, benefiting directly to the private prison industrial complex and private corporations. Tiers go from farm work to raising horses to raising cattle. The highest tier of a trustee at Angola is actually raising dogs, where there's about 10 to 12 trustees within the dog breeding program they have there. And those trustees basically have like free reign.
Trustees?
Trustees, yeah, we trust them.
Prisoner?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
They're basically living in like a shared space. They have AC, they have their own food, they have their own refrigerators, they kind of have free roam. But that's the only place that has AC on the entire prison complex. Last year...
It's probably for the dogs.
Yes, it is for the dogs more than it is for the prisoners, for sure. Last year, there were juveniles that were relocated to the a closed former death row solitary confinement wing. Just the absolute worst of the worst. I mean, there are very egregious examples. Have you ever heard of the Angola rodeo?
No.
Yeah, it is exactly what it sounds like. It is in April. It's about 2 weeks after we're going to be filming. I wish we could film while it was going on. But it is a rodeo that the prison population in the like highest, trustee program, they compete in what are essentially gladiatorial sports for the entertainment of 11,000 people over a weekend. It's the first time that they get to see people outside of the prison. They'll sell like leather works and paintings there, and it's a good old time for people to go see the rodeo. I think the grand prize is like $100 or $500 for like the top cowboy.
So first off, I want to shout out my boy BP, who you should definitely talk to, from Overthrow Media.
Okay.
If you watched my video, BP was the larger, light-skinned brother. BP's technically non-binary, but BP spent, I think, 4 or 7 years in maximum security in West Coast, in the West Coast, maybe in California or Seattle, and does prison abolition, and is a true expert on the topic. I want to make sure I put their name out there. One of the things that in conversation with BP really blew my mind is how unsubtly evil this shit is. Mm-hmm. It's unsubtly evil to a point where you feel like this stuff is made up. And when you hear it as a person who is not connected to this world, who has not done any real research, who just assumes that human rights are respected in most situations, including prisoners, when you have that background and then you hear about the horrifying things that happen to prisoners, it really does blow your mind. Which is why, going back to your original question, people are like, well, what did you do and how long are you in or whatever? Because that's the sensational, consumable aspects of it, the voyeuristic aspect of it. Voyeurism is a big part of a lot of, I think about voyeurism a lot in my content recently, mm-hmm. because we're on stream, and I think this is just the most easy way to get it across. How do we convert normies, right? How do I make myself palatable to normies and normal people? I'm not gonna sit here and recite Fanon and Marx and George Jackson to people and have them be like, oh wow, that makes sense. Yeah. No, I have to expose, we have to expose the inconsistencies and conflicts in society and illustrate them to people, and then provide them with ways to interpret and understand them. And one of the things I've noticed is that voyeurism is a big barrier to that type of work, because people are more interested in the sensational element of these human atrocities and injustices than the actual solutions to them. Mm-hmm. It's more modifiable and easier for me to peek in and say, man, it's really, wow, things are happening in jails, things are happening in Palestine, things are happening in the Congo, and then retreat back
a society of the spectacle.
Right. It's easier to just indulge and consume the spectacle than to truly digest the conflict and reality. And so for prisons, that's a very specific one, because prisons are so hidden yet all around us. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? There's literally a prison. When you drive through downtown Atlanta, it's this gorgeous city. There's cranes everywhere because we keep growing. We're stealing all the tech people from Austin and California. They're coming here and driving up home values. And in the middle of it is this big, city prison, mm-hmm. with this building with no windows that you can see from the expressway. When I hear people say, oh, what time, how much time and whatever, did you kill anyone? Did you do this? Did you do that? The reason why they ask that question and not, the hows and whys, mm-hmm. is because that question allows for their perception of the world and the status quo to remain intact. Right. Because they can explicitly say, what was your crime? Not how was your crime constructed, not how did you get caught, how did you start, but what did you do? What is your personal responsibility in the equation? And then that's all I need. That's all I want. That's all I need.
I love that you bring up the idea of spectacle, and I'll show an image on screen here. But you'll see this this is the rodeo. But if you just Google Angola prison, the very first image that comes up is this. I don't know how anyone is capable of looking at the very first image and it's not immediately in your mind, because one of my very first streams on Twitch was about Angola. And there was a very, speaking of spectacle, very popular show that was on like either TLC or Investigation Discovery called Louisiana Lockdown. And it is exactly what you're describing. It is that easily consumable, palatable, analysis-free gazing into it. There's a couple of people that you follow throughout the story, and one of them, who's in his 60s, 70s, his son ends up in Angola, and same circumstances. It was literally his dad ending up in Angola that, through, you know, if you were to look at it in any kind of critical lens, brought him there anyway. And him looking at him, there's just a very humanizing moment that immediately cuts to right back into spectacle. So even when they talk about these things and try and humanize these incarcerated people, there is still a drama to it. And we're not actually thinking, how did this person who's been in Angola since 1981 end up there? And this exists, I guess, for everybody across the US because of how we look at incarceration. There's the, if you don't be good, you'll end up at Angola for us. So there was a kind of like mythos built around it. You didn't know what Angola was. You hear about the Angola rodeo and you think like, oh, okay, yeah, they do a rodeo. But then you look at it and you go, oh, this is literally what I read about in textbooks. This is what we studied in school. And it's just here, hidden kind of out in a field in the middle of St. Francisville.
Yeah, that thread is really interesting too, because so one of the things that going back to my video, it started with the phrase "fuck the police," and one of my homies, John Lewis, who does a little narration in the video, and John is, for lack of a better putting it, kind of an around the way brother. You know, BreadTube, YouTube, LeftTube, whatever you want to call it, the video essay sphere, were very much a lot of academics, you know, a lot of petite bourgeois and bourgeois folks that got their books and their degrees and want to come and you know, educate and make content, etc. But the one of the problems of that is that it becomes very exclusionary to people who don't have that background. And so I've been very purposefully trying to like maintain connection to folks who have the same intellectual like curiosity and ideologies, but you know, don't have the student loan debt to back it up. And he first kind of like put it to me, is like, why are we saying ACAB when fuck the police said everything you need, really, and is much less co-optable, right? So you talk about the fear aspect. So I say that to say the video went through a lot of different iterations, and the final one was actually talking to another homie, Two Black, who brought up the book The Golden Gulag, which is something you should definitely touch on a little bit. And in that book, and kind of in my discourse with him, it talked about the fact that it's important to remember that the monetary aspect of Angola as a prison, it's a public prison with private contracts. But at the end of the day, when I think her name was Dr. Ruth, I'm going to butcher it. So if you replay this, put her name here. Okay. But the book is Golden Gulag. The short version is prisons are not profitable enough to exist for the sake of capital. They just don't make enough money. The private prison industry, while profitable to enough people, right, it's still profitable to a nice amount of people, but overall at scale, they cost more than they give back. However, their true value is in what you described, that fear aspect.
Social control.
The social control aspect. The spectacle of act right or we'll put you in Angola. Or we need to maintain surplus labor and we have less and less use for labor of a certain class of people. What are we going to do with them? We put them in Angola, make them somewhat useful. And then we have the spectacle of a rodeo, right? Where they're wearing prison uniforms that aren't even accurate to what prisoners look like now. Like those are like vaudevillian level prison uniforms in that rodeo picture. So the spectacle and social control of act right or you can go to prison, both as a threat and as a promise, right, is such a big part of why this maintains and why it's hard to fight, you know, because again, going back to me not doing as many political videos, they RICO'd people here in Atlanta. There are activists, people who did nothing but pass out flyers that are facing RICO charges here in Atlanta over protesting in Cop City. You know, like that is scary. You know what I'm saying? And that's scary on purpose because it's meant to instill fear and agitating against injustice. And like being aware and organized around that reality is of the utmost importance right now.
That fear intersects not just along like historic racial marginalization, that exists within the class dynamic too, because it's not just the prison. This is something many people experience when you're out with your parents as a kid and they see someone who's unhoused. They say, study your homework or you don't want to end up like that person. The violence of both poverty and direct violence from, the state through police and incarceration is an ever-present force. And it feels as though, going back to specifically Angola, and it's very apparent, remnants of the antebellum South, that whether we're talking about the Daughters of the Confederacy putting up Confederate statues during Reconstruction and Jim Crow, there is an ever-present, the master is not left. This is still here. This can easily backslide for any person, for any group of people. And I don't know necessarily, maybe you could help me with this in trying to explain this to, as you said earlier, a more palatable approach to it. How does one approach systemic racism, but also the neo-Confederacy to someone who, I don't know, never really approaches these things in their day-to-day life? How do we, reach someone like that?
I think the key is to tie it to things that they already are invested in, things they already care about. So I have a hip hop video on an old school hip hop act coming out in April. And I use it to talk about the culture industry concept from insert theory guys. I don't remember the names right now. But it's essentially some dabble Marxist theory related theory.
We can have a little theory as a treat.
Yeah, right. A little theory as a treat. But I'm never going to say Marx. I may mention the theorist in particular, but I never really I don't do a full on, here's the theory section of the video.
Yeah.
But what I do talk about is how hip hop has been commodified to the point of not even being recognizable to an extent at this point. And how rap to a great extent is dying because of the way that capitalism has found a more efficient means through which to sell its wares, and hip hop is no longer being propped up by capitalist machines. And so I hope that will burst a couple of bubbles to the hardcore hip hop heads who are like, why is hip hop feel different? Why, is the real rap not where it needs to be? Well, I'm like, maybe it's capitalism. And here's a couple of dots to connect there.
Maybe.
So with the prisons, it's a little harder because prisons, the concept of carcerality is so hardwired into our social fabric that it makes perfect sense to a lot of people.
Right.
Like a lot of people, even people who are inherently anti-police, there's, one of my videos I talk about with the left is the left is incredibly carceral in our mentality. We may be anti-prisons, but we're incredibly carceral. We're incredibly willing to ostracize, cancel, et cetera, purity tests, et cetera, people, if their entire dossier of their political past doesn't line up, especially online. That was a little more difficult. You kind of have to tie it to, you have to either appeal to a general sense of justice. With the prisons in particular, I found a lot of success in ego, in that, hey, you don't know this. You have no idea what you're talking about. Let me tell you the XXXY. And sometimes I find that to be useful because people are often shocked at how misinformed they are about our prison, about the prison industrial complex, about the justice system. First thing people say when you talk about prison abolition is, what about the rapists and murderers? And then when you explain to them that they're already not going anywhere, most rapes aren't reported. The ones that are reported aren't prosecuted, and the ones that prosecuted aren't convicted, and the ones that are convicted don't go to jail. Like, it's like so many layers of misinformation. And I think a lot of times people respond to just the shame of being so misinformed. I've seen sometimes is useful. You know, more than anything, it's just finding that connection that they have to the problem. That is the paradox to conflict. The amount of times that people have called the police and felt shitted on by the police, which is almost everybody. I don't know anybody that likes the police in actuality. They like the concept of policing, but I don't know anybody that's called the police when they needed them and felt like, all right, yeah.
Yeah, well, they like they like Law and Order police. They like, you know, television police.
Right.
That's like they're gonna show up and they're gonna, you know, they're gonna dive in front of the sexual assault and they're gonna take it to the flak vest. Like that's not reality.
It never happens.
The
Never happens. Police make you feel like shit. They make you feel like shit as you've been victimized by a crime.
Yeah, they'll show up
no matter what the crime is.
Yeah, show up and accuse you of lying. You know, tell you to get a gun.
Roll your eye, right? Tell you to get a gun. Roll their eyes at how you responded. I had police. I was burglarized multiple times, and I had police tell me to get a gun so I could shoot the burglars, and then mapped out to me how I could get away with it. And I was like, oh, this doesn't feel like what's supposed to happen here.
Also feels a little bit like entrapment, kind of.
Yeah. I'm not trying to shoot some 14-year-old over my Xbox.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned like how like the incarceral mentality is hardwired into like the American mindset, that we're very punitive. We have a very draconian reactionary notion of like what incarceration and policing is supposed to be.
Yeah. And we also love punishment. We love schadenfreude. We love seeing people get what they deserve. And I don't know, that's probably not unique. I would say that's probably, I wouldn't even say that's uniquely Western, but I'm getting out of my actual
to a certain
expertise.
point, like, yeah, you are correct. It's not a uniquely Western thing. I think for the most part that identification with like either the lone hero, the man, you know, one man, one way, you know, one gun, he's going to take care of business. That like, that spaghetti Western John Wayne type, right. Heroism, that cult of heroism we have is very deeply entrenched. And I love, since I brought up cult of heroism, I often like to, as we cover like authoritarianism, you know, the alt-right, whatever we want to call them, I like to bring up Umberto Eco's 14 Points of Fascism, that like the cult of heroism is like directly linked to the cult of death. That whether it's incarceration, our military, our police, the self-sacrifice or the, you know, killing the right person for the right reasons is so interwoven into like our popular media, how we look at politics. I mean, even like, you know, Israel-Palestine right now.
I don't watch the news much, but I watched the news for the first time in forever yesterday, and I heard it referred to as the Israel-Hamas war. And it just blew my mind that was the term they were using.
Yep.
And that's very purposeful because it creates the false narrative that you're kind of alluding to here, that we can create a version of this story that still fits into our grander American narratives.
Right.
You know?
War on drugs, war on crime, whatever it is. If we can make it into a war, we can get people behind it. Because like, I think part of like the American identity with that is that every bit of our mythos from our founding is Revolutionary War, War of Independence, that violence is not just the right way, but the only way. How does, and I mean, I guess from your perspective, how does one find themselves so attached to that, but also the detachment from the punitive, that this is not justice, we're not actually seeking out any kind of like just resolution to this, but we're seeking out vengeance on somebody. We want to ensure like suffering permanently, even after they get out of prison, because we don't ensure that they have like the right resources. We don't ensure it's rehabilitative. We just look at it the way a lot of people who came into my chat yesterday when we were doing a lot of research was, oh, well, you know, they committed a crime. Don't want to do the time. Don't do the crime. It's like, well,
right.
What is crime in this scenario? Is it nonviolent drug
and
offenses?
What is time?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, because the reality is the time is, I'm gonna say it's irrelevant. It's definitely not irrelevant, but that is not the end. Like, you don't get out of jail after doing your time and then like everybody's like, okay, cool, welcome back. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a very explicit,
No, you're good.
there's a very explicit and purposeful othering of people who have been to prison. Literally down to job applications, right? And then the way that prison works, where, you know, going back to my boy Ben, something they didn't make in the video is that, like, so Ben did 10 years, right, for armed robbery as a 17-year-old. And people in the chat are like, well, he did rob somebody. I'm like, he did rob somebody.
Yeah.
And then he went to jail for 10 years. And like, then when he got out, he had to get a job within a certain amount of time, or he would go back to jail. And then the main jobs that hire prisoners are factories.
Yep.
Which they have in prison. So he went, literally within 2 weeks
skills.
Right. Literally within 2 weeks of leaving the prison where he worked in a factory, he was back in a factory. He just got to go home and sleep for 8 hours in between shifts.
Yeah.
And so like there's no rehabilitation built into that, and rehabilitation has been categorically removed from our carceral system for the last 30 plus years now, since the crime bill. But going back to your, like, kind of the original part of your question, is you just have to kind of challenge people to engage with the contradictions there. Because so yes they did a crime. What is crime? What is the punishment? Why are the punishments so inconsistent with the crime? Is this the best solution to crime? Do you want to stop crime or punish criminals? Which one is your goal? Most people will say they want to stop crime, but historically we've been far more invested in punishing criminals. And so, like, and therein lies, like, so many of the contradictions, and kind of forcing people to engage with that. Really, that is the kind of like the first like major salvo there, is forcing them to engage with that paradox, because they have to either admit that they just get off to punishment, or say, maybe I should rethink the way I respond to carcerality. The problem is, you know, some people have been victims of crime. I raise my hand there. The way we perceive and conceptualize justice is intrinsically tied to this carceral reality. And criminals, the nature of crime and being incarcerated in prisons is so separated from the average person's day-to-day understanding of the world that there's not a lot of impetus for them to change their mind, or to, you know what I'm saying? So it's very tough. Shout out to another person was in the video, was a Skip Intro, who talked about a lot of the propaganda and made the point that, to like most people, like as you alluded to earlier, their understanding of crime in jail is TV and movies, which are incredibly inaccurate representations of how all this stuff works.
If anything, they're watered down.
Right. Watered down and fantasy, you know. The Avengers. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, that's our perception of justice. So like, you kind of have to just keep forcing people. I won't say forcing, but like introducing them to the contradiction and kind of like letting them sit with it and coaching them through it. Then when you have major events like, you know, the murder of George Floyd, hopefully being as organized as possible to take advantage when that moment comes. History and analysis on everything post George Floyd says that not nearly as much work and good things came out of that as we might perceive. But, you know, it at least opened up a lot of the conversation. And I think has positioned people to be more organized the next time the national eye is upon criminal, police injustice again. So
I do like that you brought up the idea that it's difficult for people to conceptualize it, because oftentimes, and my chat's gonna, get annoyed with me because I say this almost every day, but much of American politics, or whatever, general politics, is looking at an issue seeing what the problem is and going, we need more of that root problem to solve this problem, because it's cyclical, as most things are. The school to prison pipeline that creates absent family homes. We're splitting incomes. This creates desperate economic conditions. The defunding of social programs because of like high crime. We got to address crime because we don't have enough cops. We don't have enough cops because there's so much crime, because there's so much poverty. All that cyclical feedback loops that we're in. Whenever I go over these things and there are people who are being introduced to especially something egregious like Angola for the first time, the question always comes up, like, okay, well, what are your solutions? It's like, well, there's no one solution. Obviously, this is a multi-strata issue that we have to tackle at once, because if we snap our fingers and the 60% of people in jail who just can't make bail are out, so that they can continue their lives and be able to get a lawyer, if all the nonviolent drug offenders are out, well, the system naturally moves to another position. Looking at the relic of the Confederacy like Angola, the abolition of this one mode of production in a specific part of the country, which was what slavery was. It was dehumanizing. It was, it was evil, but it was a productive force within kind of proto-capitalism. And that being removed from this region has facilitated a different form of it. That it didn't leave, but it's just changed to where you can't really even call it, neo-slavery. It is well integrated into all aspects, because it's license plates, it's agriculture, it's culture. There is a museum.
All masks.
Yeah, it's all masks. There's a museum right next to the prison. It's the Louisiana Prison and Cultural Museum that has it has electric chairs and chains, and it's very on its face. It's not really apologetic about it either. I mean, our textbooks, we have a Louisiana history class in 8th grade in Louisiana public schools, and my teacher, he had a mural of a swamp in his classroom, and on a house in that mural was the Confederate flag, and he would call it the War of Northern Aggression. It's that well integrated into the public perceptions that we don't even really understand these things. There's a collective, not psychosis, but a collective delusion that we all have surrounding these things. It's very difficult to break from, especially in my community. I grew up with family members in the Klan, and that was so normal that it took exposure to, different people. I was going to Catholic private school, and it was only until I started going to public school and seeing, aspects of reality that were just completely separate from my own.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of the thing. So a couple of things there, right? Number one, understand that the what are your solutions statement is completely disingenuous.
Right.
It's a completely disingenuous response to what you're presenting, because that person isn't really interested in your solutions. They're only interested in any angle they can present to maintain their stance on whatever it is you're talking about. So I've come to mostly ignore those people, especially since like I'll present solutions in my content more now.
Right.
And like people will still ask that question. It's like, fuck you guys.
The solution is not this.
Right. At a minimum, solution is not this. Can we agree? Well, what are your solutions? It's like, well, shut the fuck up. Anyway, so that's number one. That said, we all could do a little bit more to, because the solutions, people, smarter people than us have investigated these things, do know about these things. There's a lot of, when we're talking about abolition in particular, we're talking about restorative justice. We're talking about, the defund the police. Like that was actually a well presented argument on what to do, and it still went nowhere because people weren't actually serious about wanting solutions. But they had that pretty well broken down as to how that would work. So we could do more just to make sure we have that on hand when people pull out that BS response. But what we're really talking about is essentially the inside of you are two wolves. Rule of one, I'm not going to go into too many details here on the internet, but it's essentially grabbing the levers of power to make drastic change. And it's amazing how COVID really illustrated how possible drastic change is in this country and worldwide. Like within a year, within months, we had universal basic income, we had expanded healthcare, we had expanded housing, we had a socialist utopia. And all it took was a global pandemic that killed millions of people.
Yeah, just a 9/11 every day. That's all it took.
Right, 9/11 every day. But suddenly they snapped their fingers, and all these things they told us they couldn't do were in our hands without much discussion.
With a Republican president too.
With the Republican president. And it was only to maintain capitalism, though. They gave us all the socialism they could give for about 18 months, just so we could preserve capitalism.
Riot taxes.
Which is really ridiculous when you think about it. So it's very possible to just make conscious governmental decrees to get things done, to fix shit. They let out so many prisoners.
Yep.
They let out so many prisoners nationwide just because it was bad. It was better for COVID to not have more prisoners. I don't even know, actually. I don't remember the rules there, but I know they let out so many prisoners based off of COVID policies. So that's like the legit reality of how change can work if we have the power to do so. And getting that power is a different thing, right? Is a more complex conversation. On the flip side, then we're talking about gradual changing of opinions and social change, which has always been, from what I perceive, and I am not the end all be all on this, but this is what I perceive in my analysis of political history in America. We have people like me and you who agitate for attitudinal changes in the public, for the Overton window to shift ever so much as we can into the direction that we think is best. And as we collect more and more minds and we normalize more and more ways in which things happen, then we see changes. Those changes, that agitation though, is persistently co-opted and captured by capitalism, by elites, by people with the levers of power to somehow be reinforced or reintroduced into the capitalist system. So again, I talk about hip hop. Hip hop was this incredibly spontaneous art cultural movement with revolutionary potential beyond anything that's happened since then. And after about a decade, they kind of had it figured out. Mm-hmm. It was really radical, really scary. And then by 92, they figured it out and said, okay, we got you guys. Come on in. You know, we got this figured out. And so
we can blame Vanilla Ice for this, is what you're saying.
Right,
MTV.
Not even Vanilla Ice. NWA is patient zero for this. But
really? Okay. Another conversation, yes, but okay.
Vanilla Ice is when it's done.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
That's the complete commodification.
Yeah, that's when they have it completely figured out. But NWA is who started the process. And that same thing happened with punk. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And then with rock and roll before it, yada yada yada. So as I talk about the gradual social change and us agitating, we also have to be prepared to constantly come up with new shit. Because every time we do something hot that is radical, they will eventually pick it apart, pull it out, figure out how to reintroduce in the system. And then we go from defund the police to fund the police. Mm-hmm. And we go from woke being what it was, woke being like, be aware of social injustice and issues to whatever the fuck the right wants it to be right now.
Yeah.
We go from
substitute for slurs in media.
Right. We go from Stonewall was a riot, and that's the origin of Pride, was this spontaneous uprising of queer people in New York, to Pride sponsored by Viacom. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. This Pride brought to you by Budweiser and Raytheon.
Right. You know what I'm saying? Pride by Deloitte.
God.
Like it's so that's what happens. So we have to constantly be reinventing things.
Thank you so much for lending your voice to this and offering your perspective. Folks, all the links in the chat for FD. I appreciate you stopping by.